in the development process of some of these campaigns or the creative, they lose sight of the customer and the target market. Like it's either not like actually captured, like no one knows, they're just guessing, or there's not sort of a standard that the client is setting for their own team or the agencies that they might work with to say, we're not deviating off this path. I'm trying to take your 12 by 12 foot wall and I'm trying to shrink it to 1 foot by 1 foot so you can be super creative in that 1 foot square, right? And do something that's really effective.
Welcome back to this episode of the Law of Relevancy podcast. I'm your host, Cords Owen, and today we have a very cool conversation with Ana Laskey. Just like Frozen, I have 2 daughters that love that movie, and so I'm so happy to be talking to Ana today. She is the president and founder of Ground Control Research, and they have a product called Telemetry, which helps in the research phase of a branding project. Thank you so much for joining us, Ana. How are you today?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me here. Glad to be here.
And you are in the beautiful state of Maine. I saw the Atlanta phone number and I was all excited because I, of course, spent 6 years there or 5 years there as a student at Georgia Tech. And I hear you went there too.
Yes, we both went to Georgia Tech, slightly different times, but I'm spent a lot of time in Atlanta, but now I've based myself in my opinion, the best state, Maine. Very beautiful up here and great people. So absolutely love it.
It is absolutely gorgeous. We visited a couple of times. And what I like about Maine is I feel like if I was in Maine, I could really chill out and really be thoughtful about the work I'm doing, especially when you're involved in like a creative endeavor like you are.
Yeah, absolutely. That's actually the biggest thing I've noticed since I moved here is I have just like a more like ambient level of calm, and just my creativity has exploded both in work and also in like personal creative ventures. Yeah, it's been great.
That's great. I mean, I know I'd be hiking and fishing and all of those things a lot, but let's talk a little bit. So I think you and I are similar. I went to Georgia Tech. I started off as a mechanical engineer. I graduated as a business major with a focus in technology and marketing. And it sounds like you had a similar path.
Yep. I started in physics. I went to mechanical engineering. I got almost all the way through it. And the thing for me was I was a co-op student. So you do internships every other semester. And I did 2 engineering co-op semesters. And I was like, wait, so we're going to spend 5 years making this widget and we don't even know if a customer is going to buy it. And something switched in my brain at that time. I was like, oh, I need to be working on the other side of this. I need to be working on the commercialization or innovation or some sort of customer facing function. And that sort of sparked my journey into marketing and innovation specifically.
Yeah, I totally feel you. I myself, where the friction that I had was, number one, I didn't study very much, and number two, and so that made engineering a lot more difficult, especially at Georgia Tech. And then number two, just the whole, like, it was unmotivating to me that there's only one answer, and that's what's so interesting about marketing is that there's a lot of right answers out there.
Yeah. There's a lot of right answers, and I think in my work with clients over the years, I kind of explain it like there's a lot of right answers, and what we need to develop is a process for the organization to get to the answer that's right for the organization right now and the goals. And so that's really kind of the work that I do, is to bring both process and insight into decision making and strategy development with my clients.
And specifically, you're talking about strategy development. I mean, a lot of this research, the market research you do, is involved in like a branding process. It's identity. It's figuring out how the brand ought to talk about themselves and their products.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, like where we start with clients is typically in either helping them find or validate a target market for their product, service, whatever it is that they're selling. And then building on that, we go deep into that market and really help them figure out, how do I take what I, as the organization, sell, care about, stand for, our vision, our mission, all that sort of more esoteric entity behind what they sell. How do I pair that with a target market? And how do I bring our business to life through the language and sort of the essence of the customer, and really make that kind of like, it's like a perfect match is what we're trying to create.
Yeah, I like to call that part of the process the squishy part.
Yeah.
Because it's like you can squeeze it and it can jump all, and it's like depending on your stakeholders, you can get wildly different assumptions. Like people come into the meeting with like predisposed
Baggage.
ideas
Yeah.
and everybody says data driven,
Right.
but not everybody truly does data driven. So walk us through that process a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. So I think at this point, everybody that I work with believes in data and believes that it's important, right? In terms of decision making. But I think what what I see with clients sometimes, and in my experience, like there will be too much data or not enough data, or it's partial data, or we're making some assumptions to try to bridge data that we have. And there's not like a clear and coherent process that a client is using to say, this is the problem I'm trying to solve. This is the data I actually need. This is the data I have. And what's data that's missing, right? And going through this very systematic kind of way of solving for the missing information they need. And that's really where we sort of focus with clients.
Well, if you don't mind, I'm going to ask you for a little bit of this recipe because the
Yeah.
people that listen to this podcast are very curious about this type of thing.
Yeah.
So, a lot of times you've got some kind of a business challenge
Hmm.
and you're trying to like create solutions for this challenge.
Yeah.
And just like you said, you may not have enough data for it.
Hmm.
Well, the good news is that a lot of times problems in business take years to solve or months and months to solve. And so at least you know that you could potentially be collecting data about that thing
Hmm.
in the meantime while you're building consensus or working through the political channels in an organization or whatnot. So help us understand what types of data that we should be gathering for different situations. Like, do you have any examples?
Yeah, for sure. And I guess let me just ask you which example you want me to use. Like if we could talk through like for a repositioning or a rebranding exercise that a company might go through. We could talk through sort of what you need to know in order to do that successfully. Would that
Sure,
be?
let's talk about that first.
Yeah, for sure. So, you know, um, this is the type of work I do all the time. So I'm just going to pick a random client, or I might mix a few examples in here. But the starting point there is usually organizations know that they want to change something about how they speak about themselves to the world, their market, whomever they're trying to serve. Oftentimes they assume and they make an assumption that they already know who they're talking to right now. So the first piece of data and information that I encourage clients to gather is an assessment of, and we work with clients to do surveys of their customer base and things like that. Really, who are you actually survey? Like, who do you serve right now? Do you really know who is your customer right now? If you're sold in retail, there's a lot of data you can buy that helps you understand that. And if we can know that, we can confirm this assumption, or we can, usually it's wrong, to be honest with you. If companies haven't looked at this and haven't been collecting that kind of data over the years, they have this sort of disproportionate, like this different instinct about who their customer is versus the reality of who their customers are. So that's something we want to confirm. And then once we confirm who their current customer is, another piece of data that has to be in place in order to successfully rebrand or to scale, to launch something, is you need to know who is most interested in what you're doing and who you are in your DNA, right? And what you offer, your value proposition. That's the next thing that we bring to customers. And I can share an example with that. Recently, like last year, we worked with a client who had it in their head. They're like, our target market, they were pre-launch, so they didn't have existing customers. They're like, our target market is these young, like Gen Z, like parents, and like Gen Z, like people, like 18 years old. And I'm like, I don't know. Let's find out, right? We actually did some research. We found out they use telemetry. We found out that their target market is parents 25 to 44. So that's actually a cusp Gen Z millennial, mostly millennial audience, and their parents. It's all parents. Our client had that instinct of parents, but this really confirmed that this is the best target market for them to focus on. And so that changes a lot about where they ended up going branding wise, the name of the product, because this was pre-launch, the positioning, what they're naming and claiming, because what's important to parents 18 or 25 to 44 is very different than what's important to, a single college kid in their college apartment, right? So that makes
Yeah,
sense.
well, it instantly as you're saying that age demographic, I'm thinking, okay, this is easy. We're just going to advertise on Instagram
Yeah. Yeah,
because
exactly.
that's where those people spend the
Exactly.
most of their time.
Exactly. Yeah, and so and in that same research, we uncovered that for this target market, like 80 something percent of them get recommendations. It's a food product. They get recommendations for recipes and what foods to buy and to make from TikTok and Instagram. So there it is, right? That's what their agency needs to focus on helping them do.
And so, like, one of the things that I think about, I mean, obviously you work with some national brands, like, especially you mentioned retail,
Mhm.
and the who is our customer is really important. And as especially retail, you might have retail outlets,
Mhm.
and as you move around the country, those demographics can change based off of the populations in those areas. How do you find consensus among those disparate parts?
Yeah, so this is where sort of the 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 role of research and data is to pair in-store data with sort of external data. Now, I think for a brand that maybe started as regional and wants to go national or is a national brand and is growing, we need to have a foundation of insight that is representative of that national picture, right? Because we ultimately want to make sure that you know, an ad that's launched for the Super Bowl or something, right? Like that it
Right.
resonates
Not
generally.
everybody can do or wants to
Right.
manage local advertising.
Right, exactly. So we wanna make sure that we're building from a solid foundation, but then we wanna look at sort of in-store data and even regional local data, and usually that's data you can sort of buy from services and providers and networks, like ad networks and stuff might have that data that helps us to see, like, how does that demographic shift or how does that persona type shift based on a particular region, or I think, like, urbanicity is a big thing, right? Like, people in rural areas tend to have different backgrounds, beliefs, behaviors than people in more urban areas, things like that.
Well, how do obviously, big brands should do this,
Mhm.
especially when they're investing millions and
Yeah,
tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars in product launches and things like that. With research like this available, like, how do some brands make such big mistakes? Like, I can think of some
yeah,
famous examples in the last 3 years of
yeah,
brands that made these, like, wild deviations of their core
audience,
customer
yeah.
groups.
Yeah, I think that a lot of times organizations, not the huge, huge, huge ones like a Procter& and Gamble or something like that, but to your point, these kind of mid-sized or
Or a
smaller.
Budweiser.
Yeah, or Budweiser, which let's not even go there, but,
Sorry.
what what they what what happens is, I think in the development process of some of these campaigns or the creative, they lose sight of the customer and the target market. Like, that strategic foundation of who are we serving and what matters to those people is not it's either not like actually captured, like no one knows, they're just guessing, or there's not sort of a standard that the client is setting for their own team or the agencies that they might work with to say, we're not deviating off this path. Like, this is who we stand for.
Right.
And there's like this shift over time because, if a agency or an in-house creative team puts together this really sexy, like flashy thing, and you're an executive, you're like, wow, that's cool. You might get sidetracked and you might go, oh, I want to launch that, not
Yeah.
thinking about who is it for, right?
So what is the best practice? So, like, we're an organization.
Mhm.
What is the way we should do these types of things? Whether it's a service launch, a product launch. Let's say we're established corporate, $100 million in revenues. We
Right.
can afford this type of thing.
Yeah.
What is the best process to do this?
Yeah. So the best process, in my view, is to start with a foundational understanding of what should my target market be as a consumer brand, like statistically, let's measure that. And then for that target market, what do I need to know about them to actually like go to market, if you will, successfully, right? I need to know what are their purchase influences, what are their emotional drivers, what are the functional drivers, what do they think about my brand, what do they think about my competitors? Again, I could rattle off and continue to rattle off a list, but we need to know that and have that as the foundation before any strategic planning, marketing, go to market strategy planning conversations are happening. Because we don't need to get in a room and ideate and brainstorm and, oh, we could do this on TikTok and this and that if we don't have like some sort of guidelines, right? I'm always saying with my clients and my agency partners, I'm like, I'm trying to take your 12 by 12-foot wall and I'm trying to shrink it to 1 foot by 1 foot so you can be super creative in
Yeah.
that 1 foot square, right? And do something that's really effective.
That sounds like it takes a little bit of leadership on your part to
Yeah.
make that happen.
Yeah, it's leadership and then also like I come from the startup world. So in the startup world, it's like pure chaos. It's way more chaotic than like $100
I'm
million.
very comfortable there. Yeah.
Yeah, and I love it, and I absolutely love it, but, like, in order to succeed as a consultant in that world, I've had to develop a lot of structure, and
Mhm.
it's not like I give services, like, I give a path, and I give actions for clients to follow along with me to get them to the result, and so that structure and that leadership and guidance is inherent through everything we do with our clients.
Well, let's talk a little bit about where the rubber meets the road a little bit. I mean, obviously you have your telemetry product.
Yeah.
How has the process of collecting information about who your customers are
Mhm.
changed in the last 20 years? I mean, obviously, I would assume even analyzing that data has gotten a
Yeah.
lot more advanced with the advent of the latest large language models and AI.
1,000%. Yeah, I mean, in the last 20 years, it's really gone from a lot of analog and in-person, centers where people would go to give feedback and researchers would sit behind a door and watch or mirror and watch and all that. But I think even if you zoom in on the last 5 years and the last 2 years specifically, um, you know, a lot of the cost of labor in a services firm like a market research firm or consultancy has historically been spent on human beings going through sets of information and looking for patterns. And then the hard part is actually them documenting those patterns and documenting and explaining in clear professional English what is being found there. With the advent of large language models, you still need humans to kind of shape where you're looking, shape what are questions you asking, right? Like what are you trying to gather, all of that stuff. But you can use large language models and AI to help you take a lot of the labor and the time out of interpreting that and packaging it into something that's client facing or that's, polished professional, a report, for example.
Yeah, we use a lot of AI in our
Mhm,
dashboards and in our data
mhm,
analytics, and
mhm.
one of the things that I've really found interesting is that depending on how you do it, you can introduce hallucinations
Yes.
into your findings if you're not careful.
Yes. Yeah.
And so, how do you guys handle that?
Yeah, so the way I think about using AI is just a tool, and we need to have really strong workflows and supervision of the tool, otherwise it's going to go awry. It's just like managing anyone. If you didn't have a job description for them, they might do who knows what, right? So, that's how we think about it. I don't see AI replacing, the work that we do. It's really about aiding the work and making sure that we have behind the scenes the processes in place to have humans do the things that humans are best at and have AI be supervised while it does the things that it is the best at. If that makes
I'm
sense.
curious if you guys is I mean, and I'm just putting you on the spot here, but I would be curious to look back, call it 5 years before
Mhm,
large language models, because
mhm.
really those have been
Yeah.
very effective at
Mhm.
things like this in the past
Right.
year, right?
Yeah.
Even year,
Mhm.
right? The
Yeah.
ones that 2 years ago
Yeah.
were probably not as good, but the
Yeah.
last year or so they've gotten pretty good. But before that, obviously you've been doing this work for a long time.
Mhm.
You've got probably data. I'd be curious to be able to look back at maybe
Mhm.
some of the work you've done, 4 or 5 years ago, and then revalidate it now that you
Yeah.
have the ability to do some deeper, quicker,
Yeah.
more thorough diving into it.
Yeah, for sure. So that's interesting because it's actually something that my team and I have done to create Telemetry, which is our AI aided product. So with that product, we're able to reduce the price, but still give and it really reduce the speed and still give clients this really great strategic foundation. But we're bringing AI in to take some of that labor out and to speed up those workflows, right? Um, and so when we were creating that, I actually went back and used it's basically a survey methodology that I've been using for years. So we have, I think, several, several. We'll just say that we have several past, projects that we've done for clients that were, a little
Yeah.
bit more custom than this, and used actually prompts on that data to see what would happen, and then we created new data, and then we use the same prompt. So anyway, it's this whole process, and what I found is that where we're using it, it's not really changing anything about the results of the way we articulate to clients, like what's the finding, what's the insight. That's being done by a professional market researcher. Yeah.
So, what other ways are you seeing AI come into your space and either be a threat or be a solution?
Yeah, so I think, because AI is so accessible, clients are using AI right now, like, to do a lot of research themselves, or what they call research to me. Um, and I think that there's power to it, but it's a little bit dangerous. I think the power is that with the right methodology and approach and structure, clients can get some really good information and insight and data from things like ChatGPT's deep research tool, or just the regular ChatGPT LLMs and things like that. What I'm sort of saying to clients and showing them when we do workshops is, you have to, before you go and say I want this to the LLM, you need to understand, like, from a business standpoint, from a marketing strategy standpoint, from an insight standpoint, like, what do you need to know and how do you need to phrase that,
Right.
and how are you going to evaluate whether what you got was right or not, right? So that's the kind of criteria that I want people to set before they kind of go down that path.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of a finding we had with one of our clients a couple of months ago. They were an agritourism client,
Mm-hmm.
and we used AI to help analyze their performance. And we got into their point of sale, we got into their Google Analytics, we
Mm-hmm.
started collecting first party data from their website.
Mm-hmm.
We were looking at their newsletter, their reservation system. It was all these disparate systems that we were combining into one. And one thing that we've found very interesting is that for their particular business, for any clients who had done 3 transactions or more,
Mm-hmm.
the revenue would like hockey stick. It would go
Mm-hmm.
way up. So like, yeah, this whole chunk of people who would only do 1, 2, or 3, one or two transactions, but as soon as you could get somebody to do 3, the revenue would go very, very high
Mm-hmm.
comparatively. But it's like, okay, now how do we figure out who those people are and how do
Right.
we repeat that or get them
Yeah.
to make 3
Right.
transactions?
Exactly. Yeah. And that's where sort of the, first party data and all these analytics tools, they tell you what, they don't tell you why. Right. And that's what I do, and like what market researchers do, is they
Yeah.
help people understand why, because the why is necessary to be able to re-engineer that same behavior, that same action on the part of a customer.
So where do you think your industry's headed?
Um, I'm optimistic. I'm hopeful that we're gonna have a lot of great leaders and good actors, in the market research space, who are really gonna stay focused on, how do I only bring this tool in a way that doesn't produce, like, hallucinations or incorrect results. I think
Right.
if market researchers, and insights people and strategists can do that, I think, you know, um, I'm just excited to see what happens, because it just continues to expand every day what you can do with these kinds of tools.
Well, Anna, thanks for joining us. It's been a pleasure speaking with you. Where
Yeah,
can we follow you and keep up with your
yeah,
latest thought leadership?
for sure. So you can go to ana.bio, ana.bio, and that has a link to, like, all the places you can find me, all the things I'm up to, links to my website and all that stuff.
That's great. Well, we're excited to keep our eyes on ground control research and all the stuff that you're working on. Thanks for
Awesome.
joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And you can find us anywhere where podcasts are found, on all the social media feeds for Bake More Pies and the Law of Relevancy podcast. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.